Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today for day 2 of GWIL's conference on resiliency and rebuilding. My name is Kimmi. My background is in gender and environment statistics, and I was one of the conference programming directors for GWIL last year. I'm thrilled to be moderating today's panel, Changemakers, Women Leaders in Climate Justice, which has been co-sponsored by the Black Student Union. Just to review the format of the panels, I'll start by introducing our topic, then our panelists, then ask them to share a bit about their work. We'll then move on to our main conversation, leaving about 15 to 20 minutes for questions at the end. So if you'd like to ask a question, please do so by submitting a question in the Q&A functionality, and we'll get to those at the end. So I'll jump right in. As former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mary Robinson has said, climate change is a man-made problem with a feminist solution. On this panel, we will learn from a few of the women leaders and visionaries working to address climate change today. That said, I couldn't be more excited to speak with Dr. Adrienne Hollis, Melissa Basque-Roux, and Cecile Turiago about their work in climate and environmental justice, the energy transition in sub-Saharan Africa, investments, utility scale renewables, and more. They come from very different backgrounds and industries, but if anything, I think that illustrates the need for all sectors to contribute solutions to climate change and climate justice. First, it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Hollis. Dr. Adrienne Hollis is both an environmental toxicologist and an environmental attorney. She has more than 20 years of experience in the international justice and public health arena, first by working in the federal system as a section chief at the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, where she worked on developing public health assessments for Superfund sites. Later, she served as an associate professor in the Institute of Public Health at Florida A&M University, where she developed the environmental and occupational health track. After law school, she worked as a law clerk in the New Jersey District Court and the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, and also as the project attorney at Earth Justice. In 2016, Dr. Hollis began work as the Director of Federal Policy at We Act for Environmental Justice in the DC office. Currently, she is the Senior Climate Justice and Health Scientist at the Union of Concerned Scientists. And in that position, she works at the intersection of public health, environmental justice, and climate change, and leads the work on methods for assessing and documenting the health impacts of climate change on communities of color and other traditionally disenfranchised groups. She's a professorial lecturer at the Milken School of Public Health and the Environmental and Occupational Health program, and an adjunct professor at NYU's School of Law, where she co-teaches an environmental justice seminar. She's a member of numerous committees, including the U.S. EPA Clean Air Act Advisory Committee, the Title VI Alliance, the American Public Health Association's Environment Section, and the Environmental Justice Subcommittee. Welcome, Dr. Hollis. Thank you so much for being here. Our next panelist, I'm happy to introduce, is Melissa Basque-Roux. She joins from the IFC Gender and Economic Inclusion Group to lead the implementation of IFC Gender Program in the renewable energy sector, Energy to Equal. Based in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, Melissa brings 14 years of experience working in strategy consulting and in the energy sector. Prior to joining the IFC, she was leading the World Bank's Lighting Africa activities in West Africa, working with government and industry actors to catalyze a sustainable market for affordable, high-quality, off-grid lighting and energy products. Before joining the World Bank Group, Melissa worked in Washington, D.C. with FSG Social Impact Advisors, advising a private foundation on developing its international portfolio and designing shared value activities for a prominent NGO to build more sustainable and scalable corporate partnerships. Prior to this, Melissa was engaged in various assignments in the climate change area through Ecosecurities in the UK and with the UNDP in Burkina Faso. Melissa also worked as a consultant with the Accenture Finance and Performance Management team in Canada, designing and implementing financial tools for companies in the mining sector and advising those clients on their change management strategies. Melissa holds a Master's of Arts from the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in International Relations and International Economics, as well as a Bachelor's of Business Administration from HSF Montreal, where she specialized in finance and economics. Thank you so much for being here, Melissa. Welcome. And last but not least, our third panelist, Cecile Turiago. She is the co-founder and managing director of Enercar, a renewable energy and clean technologies finance advisory firm. Prior to Enercar, she was managing director of equity investments in Latin America at GE Capital Energy Financial Services. Over the course of her 20-plus year career, she has been involved in more than 40 transactions worldwide, leading to an aggregate of over $10 billion in investments, representing the full spectrum of equity and debt structures, including an IPO. She's actively involved in the entrepreneurship ecosystems of Mexico, Colombia, and Portugal. She's an Endeavor mentor, a member of the board of Social Ventures Exchange Mexico, and an angel investor. Cecilia is a founding member of the Women in Private Equity and Venture Capital Association in Mexico and Women in Technology in Portugal, organizations that encompass her commitment to innovation and the advancement of women in the investment field. Cecilia holds a master's in international economics and international relations from Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, a master's in international studies from the University of Warwick, and a bachelor's in social sciences from the Instituto Tecnológico Autónomo de México. If we were in person, there would be a huge round of applause right now for all of our panelists, but my virtual ones will have to do. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for joining us. I think Cecilia is going to turn on her camera soon, but as I've been thinking about our conversation, I'm really just interested in what climate justice really means to each of you, specifically how your work intersects with climate justice. So if we could start off with that, we'll keep the same order and start with Dr. Hollis, then Melissa, then Cecilia.
Thank you, Kimmi, and thank you for the invitation to be here. I'm very excited. So climate justice is, for me, I visualize it, if I could get you to visualize it as an environmental justice as an umbrella, and climate justice as one of the spokes of that umbrella that holds it up, that supports it. Because if our environment is everything around us and within us and everything that we do, then climate justice is a specific part of that. We're focusing on the effects of man-made issues around global warming and greenhouse gas production. And the reason that I work in that space as a senior climate justice and health scientist is that it follows logically from my work with environmental justice because it disproportionately affects the same communities that are affected by environmental justice, both locally and globally. And so that is why I focus. My transition was so smoothly from environmental justice to right now focusing on climate justice and everything that that encompasses, including the effects of COVID-19 and things of that nature.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Melissa, would you like to?
Sure. Thanks very much, Kimmi, for the question and for the great introduction. It's a real pleasure for me to be on this panel for a couple of reasons. First, I'm proud SAIS alum, year of 2011, with a focus on ERE. Now a gender, energy, and energy specialist at IFC, being able to share my experience and perspective 10 years later is a real privilege. So thanks again for the invitation. Second is the selected topic for this conference, talking about resilience in rebuilding and claiming a more equitable future could not be timelier. The pandemic has really shown the fragility of our economies and of our industries. And it also made us realize that we need to readjust in the way we operate. If anything, I really believe that COVID-19 provided all of us with a lifetime opportunity to reflect on how we can build back better. So going back to your question, climate. Climate is an important topic. I will start with climate first and we'll come to climate justice later. So climate is an important topic. When talking about climate, we're basically talking about our future. We're talking about what we are building today and what we are leaving for future generations. Climate is also a priority sector at IFC. We have a practice that looks into increasing our investment in climate smart sectors. And this includes investing in in green building, in public transport, in electric vehicles, waste management, water treatment, and renewable energy as well. Today, I will really focus on the energy sector per se, because this is the sector in which I really work. So let me start maybe sharing a few facts and speak about the energy transition. The access rate is estimated at 43% in Africa, making the renewable energy sector a priority sector to meet our energy targets and to unlock access to energy for many. However, despite the anticipated growth and the many jobs that are being created, only 32% of women are participating in the sector at the moment. So harnessing the potential of women and men is really crucial to create sustainable growth. In the work we do at IFC and our gender program in the renewable energy sector, we work with private companies in sub-Saharan Africa to increase women's participation as leaders, as employees, as customers, in communities as well. What we do is that we work to create with these companies respectful workplaces, providing guidance on how to address gender-based violence issues, among other things. So I'm sure we'll get into the challenges and the opportunities, but if I am to summarize what climate justice really means to me, I will retain 2 points. Number one is the need to provide equal access to energy services for both men and women, regardless of their geographies. And this is where I believe the off-grid technologies and the renewable energy sector in general could play a catalytic role. Number two, we will really need to address the status quo and recognize that women's economic participation is critical to support our countries and our companies' growth, as well as the well-being of families. With the pandemic, women struggle even more than before to retain an equal footing in the economy. Their COVID-19 experience is shaped by rising domestic and workplace violence, higher care responsibilities, precariousness of jobs, and disproportionate lack of access to working capital. So if we want to talk about justice, it's really time to close the gender divide. Back to you, Kimmi.
Great, thank you so much for all that insight. I'm looking forward to discussing that more in a bit. Cecilia?
Thank you, Kimmi, and I am very happy to be back at SAIS, even if it's virtually. It's been a number of years since I graduated, but at the end of the day, it's a pleasure to be back in my alma mater. I'd like to rephrase the question regarding what climate justice means to me and what it that I'm doing both on the professional and personal level. And the way I would like to word it is how, as humankind, we end up in this climate injustice. Climate actually is now at the forefront, backward and center of our discourse. But the reality is that we took it for granted for so long, literally since the Industrial Revolution and since the day we got, as humankind, embarked in this linear economy, where we take, we make, and we waste. A model that is heavily extractive, resource intensive, and that it produces greenhouse gases, gases that are causing the climate crisis. So in this, we extract materials from the earth, from the oceans, we apply energy and labor to them, we manufacture a product, and then we send it, we sell it to a user, and then the final user discards it. And this is a vicious circle of just, at the end of the day, is waste at every level. And in this approach that we've embarked, and it's been a number of centuries now, but it just we manage as humankind to accelerate it at a speed that is doing away with odds fantastically. Why? Because this approach does not manage resources such as land, water, or minerals for the long term. Whatever we do, we just consider it externalities. So to my mind is it's not a question of reversing these, because we don't have the time, if we're meant to be around, if we keep doing away with the only ecosystem that let us live as a species. And that is the injustice, is towards ourselves as humankind, towards the less privileged, the ones that are more, they're in the receiving end. And I have to say that most of them, women, children, that are not at the decision-making table of how we produce things or how we consume them. So to me, the most important thing here is that we can't go on this linear economy. And how is it that we can actually start reversing things to a sustainable level, because that is what's going to bring us back to an acceptable degree of justice. I would love to go in regenerating, because then we'll be at justice, not just acceptable. But for the time being, what I'm doing, because this is something that we tend, this is a figure that I'm going to put out there, that we tend to think that what's causing the majority of these greenhouse gases is how we generate energy, how our energy systems, our energy management, and the way we use energy for transportation. And indeed, those account for 55% of greenhouse gas emissions. But the other 45% is extremely relevant, because it's exactly how we produce and consume. And it goes all the way from the way we build, the way we build, from buildings to vehicles to any source of products, and the way we discard those products, and especially the way we manage or mismanage land and the oceans. So we have now a full picture of the 55% and the 45%. So on the professional level, what I'm doing, I work on utility scale on the financing and investment side of renewables and clean technologies. So that is already, we're on the right track, but we're on the right track, but we're not where we need to be. To make things at the speed we actually need to reverse matters. So what on the personal side, as an investor, where I'm focused at the moment is on the climate-driven startups and scale-ups that are tackling both the way we produce our food, the way we fish, the way we produce our products. And so on those two sides, that's where I'm working at the moment. From the utility scale on the renewables to how is it that we're going to fund these innovations that will help us getting back to a level of justice that is not justice only towards humankind, but towards the planet that is hosting us.
Thank you. Great. Thank you for you all for all that insight. I think the range of your experiences really illustrates how climate change is ubiquitously affecting all of us in different sectors and geographies, the planet, and especially women and girls as the most marginalized and vulnerable populations. On the other side of the spectrum, there have been studies that show women can be key change makers in climate change responses if they're empowered to be. And so my next question to all of you is, can you talk about the potential role of women and women-led initiatives in adapting to climate challenges? And why is this important? Maybe we can start with Cecilia, then Dr. Hollis, and end with Melissa.
I'm very happy to approach this matter, and what is it that we're doing, and what is it that everyone is doing from their respective trenches. And on my side, again, on the investment side, it's quite worrisome that you get to an industry that in this day and age is actually booming, and you encounter that from the board level to the executive, the C-suite, the executive level, the mid-level, and and junior levels, there is a lack of women talent all the way through. And either these are the major leaders in renewables, in offshore wind, in solar, in battery storage, or in the private equity funds, infrastructure funds that invest in this field. It's pretty much, the picture is really gloomy. I'm going to give you just an example of, I believe in the wind industry, it's 33% of women workforce. In the venture capital and private equity industry, we go to 9%. In the top 100 firms, we only have 7% of leadership in these positions. So this can just show you, or it's a clear example of we're missing out on talent. And so what do we do? Or part of my my role in the associations, where in women in technology, women in private equity, women in venture capital, is bringing more and more talented women to the forefront, where we can actually support one another and work with the relevant agents that always complain that, oh, we don't have women panelists, we don't have women on the board, we don't, guess what? Here they are. So let's get the cognitive biases out of the way if we want to make matters change, because we're trying to resolve 21st century problems with the same structure that we've been carrying, that were visible for the 19th century, perhaps for the 20th century. But surprise, surprise, today women are 50% of the population, and we need them at the decision-making table. We need diverse teams. We need to attract more women to engineering, more women to business. And especially once you attract them, how do you include them? How do you make them part of this amazing energy transition, energy revolution? If we leave talent behind, we're gonna end up with the same results. So that is on the one hand. On the other is, I'm happy to fund women founders. I've found there are at least 3 come to mind when it comes to startups in the energy field. But one of the industries that is the more polluting or causing us more havoc is the fashion industry. And I must say that we can do a lot to fund amazing women in a field that's usually been seen as the women's. Hence, there is a lot that can be done, and that from from each and every single trenches, or the trenches that we're working at, we can do something to advance women and to put the voice of women at the forefront and center of our discourse, because it's, and study after study, you name it, McKinsey, Bain, Crunch, you name the study, and I can go on and on. The IFC, I was actually quoting the IFC yesterday for number things. A diverse team is going to bring, is not only your returns not only double or triple, but the reality is that the solutions and the risks, the way we approach our risks, and this take, make, and waste is probably one that women are much more conscious on how to balance that and how to make this a virtuous circle and not a vicious circle.
Here, thank you. Dr. Hollis?
Yes, thank you, Kimmi. That's a great question. First, let me just lay a little foundation quickly, that when we talk about, in the space that I work, environmental justice, most of the organizations, and I want to preface this, that there are some great organizations that are led by men, so that none of them will be angry at me afterwards, but the majority of them are women-led organizations. So when it comes to the effects of initially from redlining and not in my backyard and locally undesirable land uses and all of that, those protests were led by women. When issues around environmental injustices in communities started coming to the forefront, and communities would protest, why are you placing facilities here? Why is this the area where with minorities, where minorities live, that you're putting these polluting facilities in? Women led that movement, but there were men, I acknowledge that too. When we talk about climate change in this country, women are most at risk. Globally, women are most at risk. When we talk about forced migration, women and girls are more at risk from being raped or murdered as they make that trek away from wherever it is they live to migrate to safer ground, be it for political reasons or for climate-related reasons. Another example is climate issues around the Standing Rock, the issue of the Dakota Access Pipeline and Standing Rock, and the fact that there's so many murdered and missing Native women, right? So that women are more at risk. Just to lay that foundation, when it comes to asthma, you see the greatest increase in asthma in women and in adult women, and asthma from pollution, from inhaling toxic fumes. So that leads me to COVID-19. You see a higher rate in women. So it follows that women will take up the mantle in that battle, if for no other reason than that. However, that is not the only reason. Women are nurturers, right? They take care of their families and look out for their families and friends and others. That puts them at risk, because when it comes to evacuation, for example, in hurricanes, women are going to make sure that their families are taken care of first. So they're not really going to put themselves ahead of anybody, which makes them more at risk for death, from and issues with one of the issues. I know I'm jumping, but all of these are situations where women are forced to take the lead because they have been forced to be the victim, right? I remember one of the commercials or messages that I heard during the initial stages of the pandemic was that domestic violence doesn't cease, just because we have a pandemic. And what you've really done is because you created a condition where people have to stay at home, you've really increased the opportunity for violence against women. So that is one reason. For me, in my opinion, the main reason I think women are leaders, is that they can see the entire picture, the ramifications of an action. So when we look at something like seeding, for example, and I have nothing against this perspective, seeding the clouds to decrease the amount of CO2, whatever that process is, that it has ramifications locally, right? And I think that looking at the forest and the trees is something that women do, that women have a better hold on, because they're going to think about, how does this affect everybody? And I do have some of my colleagues that I work with who are male, have that same tendency. It's seeing the big picture and seeing how an action is going to affect everybody, and seeing how the ramifications of past things that affect people, like racism, and we've seen that when we talk about the ceiling, the glass ceiling. when we talk about environmental injustice and as I mentioned before, asthma and COPD and heart conditions and children being most at risk and just it's the female themselves. I think that you would expect that women would take the lead because they want to protect those around them and those who they consider to be more at risk or more, I don't like to say vulnerable as a population because people aren't vulnerable. The conditions that they're in make them more vulnerable. But I think that women step up because that is in their nature as protectors. So thank you for that question.
Thank you for that response. I often think of the COVID responses that are led by women that made headlines very early on in the pandemic because they were so quick to react. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Melissa?
Sure. So I really believe there is an important, very important role for women-led initiatives and women-led businesses in general in the renewable energy sector and also in the off-grid space, if we want to be even more specific. You said it before, Kimmi, women are great agents of change. They actually often happen to be the main end users of smart energy solutions, such as solar home systems, or electric cook stoves, and other productive use appliances as well. So I would say that women really play a catalytic role in the design of customer-centric solutions for the reason that they often happen to be the end users of these solutions. So they understand what they need and they are better equipped to provide guidance on what is it that should be provided to the customers at the end of the day. Another point that I wanted to share is that when it comes to building relationship at community level, when it comes to engaging with customers, working on collecting funds, for example, women again have proven to bring more results. So to your question, I would say that more women-led initiatives are needed to better respond to the energy transition and also to accelerate the energy transition in a way. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. I think all of your responses have given such a 360 view to how women are so integral in all spaces and in all sectors to contribute to a good climate response. So I guess my next question is, as leaders in your respective fields, can you maybe speak to the challenges or the realities of being a woman in climate-related work? Maybe we can start with Melissa, then Cecilia, then Adrienne.
Sure. So the challenges are very many when it comes to women at leadership level, unfortunately. And again, I will continue sharing my experience from the renewable energy sector. And I believe that it's good to have facts. Let's remain factual, and I will refer to a groundbreaking study from IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency. That was a study published in 2019 on gender perspectives in the renewable energy sector. And we found from this study that less than 25% of women were in leadership positions. So the numbers speak for themselves. There is still a lot to be done to ensure that women and men have equal access to leadership positions. In the work we recently conducted at IFC under the Energy to Equal program, our partners reported that they have less than 30% of women in board positions. Our program is working with these companies, with companies from the sector, on designing the right set of policies to attract, retain, and train women so they can climb the ladder. This includes having parental leave policies, childcare policies, gender-based violence and sexual harassment policies, as well as grievance mechanism as well. So in addition to that, because we're trying to think about the landscape and the challenges that women might face, there is a need for more networks and mentoring opportunities for women as this can truly help accelerate their career. And finally, I would also emphasize on the importance to have the right regulatory environment at country level, so women can have the same rights as men when it comes to land ownership, for example, or even simple things we're taking for granted, but having a bank account on their name, that's something that is not that, that's not something evident in some countries in the region. I'm talking about sub-Saharan Africa. So yeah, Kimmi, back to you.
Thank you for that. Cecilia?
I'm going to touch upon, because the 25%, and that is the figure published by Arena. And I am part of the 25%. And I must say, it gets quite lonely. It does. It gets quite lonely to be the only woman in a room, the woman at the decision-making table. Because of what I pointed out, when you've got a diverse team at the decision-making table, it's lovely when you actually walk into a room and it's 50-50, because the exchange, it just changes magically, because you've got a diverse points of view, diverse perspectives at the table. And this goes, it's irrelevant which industry we're talking about, but the reality in the energy industry is that it's been a male-dominated industry for as long as we can recall. And we can't move at the speed needed, and I mention it again, because we're going into the offshore wind and the technical skills needed, mainly. Now, ones that are the engineers that are graduating, the female engineers, but what do they need? They need just what Melissa pointed out. They need a number of policies to stay there, to feel that they're safe, to feel that there is no bias against them, that there are no questions related that, so, oh, you were hired because you are a woman and the quota has to be met. Well, guess what? I may have been hired because I am a woman, but that's irrelevant. It's not the why, it's the what for. I was hired to perform and to give results. So a number of things have to change. And I must say that I have seen there was goodwill, at least, from the industry at the utility scale side, and also from the funds to bring more women on board. But I think that there is still a lot. I mean, that 9% that I mentioned in the private equity, infrastructure, and venture capital is deplorable. And it's a number of cognitive biases that don't help us. So to me, what are the challenges? The challenges is, how do we keep women in the workforce? How do we actually promote more women to get involved in technology, in sciences, in business, and not fear that this silly meritocracy that, oh God, they chose me because I am a woman. Guess what? They've been choosing men for a long time. So it's about that we level the playing field, because we need more women at the decision-making table. And those spaces are occupied now by men that are making decisions that end up, again, in the most vulnerable are the ones that carry this weight. And Dr. Hollis pointed it out. They are the minorities, women, girls. So if we want really this revolution and to be the energy revolution that we want to see, this energy transition, the hydrogen transition, so on and so forth, that is so exciting at the technical and innovation level, we cannot carry it out without women. I keep saying this, we're 50%. We have decision-making power when it comes to purchases. So let's actually, when it comes to our own investments, how do we want our money? Do we really want to invest in this energy company? Let's study that. Is this energy, what are the policies of this company? Do they have a diverse and inclusion policy? How many women are at the board? Let's start looking at ourselves with purchasing power and investing power. I think we're going to be less lonely at the top.
Great. Thank you, Cecilia. Adrienne?
Yes, thank you. So I think the issue or the challenges, I think your question was about the challenges of women in this space, right? That women face in this space. So two things. First, traditionally the thought was that white men held the knowledge and the expertise to deal with most of the issues that affect us on a global scale, or even at a local scale. For example, issues around nuclear energy, or issues around global health or global safety, are issues that have traditionally been white male dominated. Issues around human resources are traditionally thought to be women focused jobs. So just operating in those silos because of inherent unconscious systemic bias is a big challenge. Another challenge I faced, if you recall, when I think it was the last election before this one, when a large number of women were elected to the House and the Senate, and it was just an explosion, and people were so excited. The reason behind that is because that is not the norm. And one of the things that I really focus on is my work on policy to ensure that minorities and people of color and underserved populations, and yes, that includes women, that their voices are heard and that they are included and considered in any pieces of legislation. In that space, the number of women have increased. But yet again, traditionally, that has not been a role for women. Women have not been in spaces where decisions are made that affect a country, or a city or a state, even for that matter. So I think stereotypes are the main challenges that women face. And then there's the issue, I personally have two challenges, and as do a lot of women, being a woman and being a woman of color. So that the challenges that women of color face are even greater than the challenges that women in general face. But one thing that we do have in common is the fact that we are considered as a whole to be inferior to men, particularly when it comes to things like salary. And one of the things that I always teach the younger women that I know is to know your worth. Because only then can you are in charge of what, what is considered to be applicable to your expertise and your experiences. And so I think that empowering women is the main way that we can help to, destroy is the word I want to use, the stereotypes that exist and that keep us from really making the impact that we can make in spaces that affect the world in general, and for me, specifically the US, when it comes to public health and environmental exposures.
Thank you. The challenges and obstacles for women are at all levels, and from those in leadership positions to those who are trying to have a seat at the table. And sounds like support's needed on policy level, societal level, individual levels. Thank you for sharing all of that insight. So now I'll move on to individual questions for each of the panelists, maybe like a quick 1 or 2 minute response for each, and then we can move on to questions. My first question is for Adrienne. To follow up on what you said about policy, you've long been at the forefront of environmental justice and climate change here in the US. And last year, you spoke with us about how the previous administration had negatively impacted any momentum that the environmental movement had. Can you speak to any policy changes this administration, the Biden administration, has passed that you would consider fake or real solutions to environmental justice and what their implications are?
That is a great question. All your questions are, but this one's particularly good. I don't have any examples of fake solutions, and what I have is I consider to be being on the right path to solutions. And so, for example, in the first month in office, President Biden, the administration passed more than 25 executive orders. And most of those, more than half of those, talked specifically about environmental justice and recognized the effects on the disproportionate effects on communities of color and the disenfranchised and poor communities, rural communities. That's impactful because that didn't happen. I think what I mentioned last time was that about 100 environmental regulations have been rolled back or were in the process of being rolled back by that last administration. One of the first things that the Biden administration did was stop that and start taking a look at putting in place and strengthening those regulations, putting people in charge who have expertise in an area, like the EP administrator or the Department of the Interior director or the Secretary of Defense, and I shouldn't say that because I'm biased, because that's my cousin who happens to be a male, but okay. But just putting in putting people in charge, not based on race, but based on expertise, and they just happen to be people of color. You know what I'm saying? That we're not just going to say we need to get 10 Black people. We're saying we're going to get 10 people with experience in this area who happen to be people of color. And I appreciate that. And I like that because that is what the world looks like. And when you look at all of the executive orders, because I did that, when you just look at them one after the other and just read a short synopsis of each, what you have is, if everything worked according to how those executive orders lay out the path that we should take, is the perfect conditions for a world that looks as diverse as the population is and that supports everybody, right? Equally. And that's phenomenal to me. So while we haven't reached solutions, we are well on the way if we follow what has been laid out, I think, as a roadmap to success. Thank you.
Great, thank you. That sounds heartening. Cecilia, my question for you on a semi-related note, can you speak to the trends or changes you've seen in renewable energy investments, and if there's more, and what more can be done by investment strategies to be more climate friendly?
Indeed. In terms of the energy transition and it's a total hype, because I must say that when we come to renewables, when it's the hydro, wind, and solar, and even offshore wind have been, hydro has been around for over 50 or 100 years by now, but utility scale wind has been around for 20, including offshore wind, and solar for about 10. And the solar, the way the costs have dropped in solar has made solar exponential worldwide, even to the extent that we've now got distributed generation. And this is fantastic, and that is renewables per se. But the reality is that where we're experiencing a revolution at the moment is in terms of, that's generation, but in terms of transportation, I'm going to break this into two, and one is battery storage for vehicles, and I'm going to say passenger vehicles, and the other one is the hydrogen revolution that is covering the whatever cargo and even passenger truck or passenger buses, lorries, trucks, so on, so for anything that has to do with cargo, and even shipping, because that is the hydrogen revolution, and especially green hydrogen. There's a lot of hype towards that side, because they're pretty hard to decarbonize sectors. So there is a lot of hope, and it's going to take its time, because obviously if you talk about hydrogen, there are all sorts of shades of hydrogen, and it's called the rainbow, and blue hydrogen and gray hydrogen are from fossil fuels. So this leads us nowhere. Where is the investment going? Again, to this, to the offshore wind. There is a lot of interest in deploying capital, and especially large amounts of capitals to offshore wind, still solar and wind, and onshore wind. On the battery storage side, this is also becoming very attractive in terms of capital deployment. The drawback that I see here, at least when it comes to transportation, especially passenger vehicles, is that we're talking about lithium at the end of the day. And I'm just going back to the way we take, make, and waste. We extract. So this is a concern. And then the other concern is obviously the hydrogen and the colors, as I mentioned. But there is a lot going on, and the energy transition, if we keep on the greenwashing and the impact washing, we will not get where we need to get. And I'm not talking about 2050. For me, 2050, we're all going to be floating somewhere in an ocean, and you name it, Miami, New York, it's for the next hurricane, and I dread to think about the Pacific Islands. But if we keep, and that is something that I've also seen on the investment side, there is this hype on the sustainability, and there is a lot of greenwashing and a lot of impact washing. In terms of what can we do for more resilient investment strategies, just where I started, the linear economy is leading us nowhere. While the circular economy is worth from 2 trillion to 4 trillion. And in the circular economy, pretty much nothing goes to waste. And I'm just going to give an example of a business model that is extremely interesting when it comes to lithium, and when it comes to metals and mining, and it's called urban mining. We dump a bunch of things. Here goes the mobile and probably my lithium battery, a number of things that end up in waste, but that have a number of metals and that are now being mined for in all our dumpsters, even gold. So this is just an example. The other one is exactly who ends up with the responsibility. This is an investment strategy. Are we investing in models where the responsibility ends with whomever produces this gadget? Well, or this gadget, or the laundry, or my laundry set, the washing machine, the dryer, the turbine, the wind turbine, the solar panel, and so on and so forth. Does it end up with me, and that the consumer, have to do something with it because I don't really want to go, all I can do is put it in the trash. Well, I don't want it in the trash. If we actually shift that responsibility to the producer will make sure that they actually make good use of the metals that are in here. So it's a whole transformation of, are we investing in linear strategies, or are we investing in business model of a circular economy that is a win-win for everyone? That is for me, that is very exciting. If we can invest in, there are 9 business models, but if we can make sure that it's $4 trillion that will put, that will definitely get us back to that climate justice that we are struggling with now, because we are at the injustice level.
Thank you. Melissa, along the same vein, we just heard Cecilia talk about kind of how we can make big level change with investments. With your work focused on gender and energy, can you speak to how delivering sustainable energy solutions might be beneficial to communities on an individual level, specifically women? And I know we're running a bit out of time, so we have one more question after this, and maybe two, but please, looking forward to your response.
Sure, Kimmi, happy to do that in 30 seconds so we can have additional time, especially for the Q&A. So in terms of benefits that we can get from renewable energy solutions, the first point I would say is that access to smart energy solutions and energy solutions in general can really be a game changer for women. These solutions can foster access to information, and with more access to information and more education, we contribute to having a woman empowered in the way. I will share as well, evidence that also demonstrates that women in electrified households report significantly lower acceptance of domestic violence. Another benefit that I can share is that access to energy solutions can, of course, provide more opportunities for income generation. And maybe final point is around safety. With electrified community, you also reduced the insecurity for the population in general, but even so for women in particular that are most of the time the victims of GBV. I will stop there, Kimmi, for now.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That gave me a lot to think about. So we have two questions here, and in the interest of time, if all of you could respond with a yes or so the question is, do the panelists think that the Paris Accord is creating significant change or that it's more symbolic? If each of the panelists can say either significant change or symbolic, then we can move on to the next question. Adrienne, we'll start with you.
Significant change.
Melissa?
Significant change.
Cecilia? You're on mute.
Symbolic.
Symbolic. Great. Thank you, everyone. And so for our final question, how do you get across to people that are skeptical of climate change, or especially skeptical that climate change would intersect with gender? Does anyone want to take this?
I love to take it.
I think, okay, Cecilia and then Adrienne.
It goes hand in hand. You cannot exclude one with another, because the way women think, and Dr. Hollis pointed out, we have a 360 vision. And when you actually exclude the voice of women to solve these matters, you are leaving out the 360 vision. So when you exclude time and again, this is the result, and where we are is the result of excluding women.
Yes, thank you. Adrienne?
Yeah, I think quickly, one of the ways, the main way is with data and proof, because people want to know three things. One is, what is it? How does it affect me? And what can I do about it? So you have to show them how it will affect them if it hasn't already.
Great. Thank you so much. I think that concludes our panel for today. Thank you so much for sharing your insight and your experiences and being so candid and insightful. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm sure all of our attendees did as well. With a minute left to spare, I was wondering if any of you had maybe a sentence or two as a takeaway for our audience today.
I want to say, I just quickly want to say that when it comes to the Paris Accord, it's significant to me because of the opportunity it presents to make it better, right? Not just the action itself. And know your worth.
Thank you, Adrienne.
We're investors and we're consumers, and make sure that you're investing in the world.
Yeah, and Kimmi, last final word from my end. We talked a lot about the policies that are needed to advance gender participation in the sector, but I believe Dr. Hollis touched on a very, very important point, which is taking ownership and empowering women. I believe as much as policies are important and setting a favorable regulatory environment, it is critical for women to take responsibilities and also to be able to embrace new opportunities when they arise.
Great. Thank you so much. So that'll conclude this session. Take care, and we hope to see you all in our next webinar.